cannot, ignore the fact that the Latino vote, the Latinx vote has been a very big hot topic, right? And depending on who's talking, you hear it is presented differently. So the demonization of the Cubans in Miami versus the saviors of the Mexican and Central American community in Arizona, and so on and so forth, which I always believe is a tool of division to always continuously point out the groups to cause dissent within Black Americans and then the Latinx people. Then I'm surprised that they didn't point out the Arabs and the Middle Easterners and the people who were and what their vote looked like. But how do we have these conversations and explain to people that a lot of people have been misinformed and emotionally moved? And when you talk about Cuban Americans and you talk about socialism, and I read this article this morning that there was a congresswoman who said, we are never to use the word socialism again. It destroyed us. And we talk about it here all the time because we're like, God, what an amazing a tool that Donald Trump has had in his administration, and moving his flock through fear and emotion and an abundance of misinformation. So I wanted to just have that, I don't know what the question is there because there's so much to talk about it, but I certainly wanted to hear what you thought about it because it's been so harmful to my community in terms of infighting. Because now the Puerto Ricans are like, they threw paper towels at us, you fucking Cubans, and the Cubans and this, and the Mexicans are like, he called us immigrants, and there's no solidarity. So, please, either one of you can start. I just want to hear what both of you have to say about it.
I can talk from the perspective of coming from the United Kingdom, right, where a lot of our policies that are strongest are quote unquote socialist. Now, to take it to the level of like, what do people think of when you say socialism in America? It is a dirty word for far too many. Where does that come from? It comes from a manipulation of the term, and that's allowed through a lack of education on the matter. Like anything, like people in the United States, the reason that they're so misinformed on the demise and the constant kind of, I would say, segregation in so many ways of the Black community is because they don't understand redlining. They don't understand how things consistently worked after slavery. They think slavery, and all of a sudden Abraham Lincoln came, and then Martin Luther King helped kill the last racists by killing their ideas, and then all of a sudden everything's fixed. They don't understand the specific terms that oftentimes economically impact what we see today and policies that are put in place, and why a lot of areas suffer still to this date from things that have happened years ago. And the same thing I see and same trend with socialism. So I had a conversation recently with an Uber driver. I was over in Bed-Stuy, and he was Cuban, and he was driving me across, and he recognized me from videos, and we had actually a very fruitful conversation. But then when it got to the topic of socialism, he declared that he lived in America most of his life, but his description of it was a carbon copy of what it comes from the mouth of someone on Fox News or any of these different sources. And it's a very useful tactic. The president understood exactly what he was doing when he constantly waged this war on socialism. And he's not the one he's just another manifestation of that attack. It's been going on for years. You can date it all the way back, Reagan era, it's been constant. Now, it's because people don't really grasp what it means and what actually goes into a socialized society. Now, any of the societies that are thriving under quote unquote socialism, because I always like to say it that way because people just have so many different terms from it, are ones that have the stability to handle social safety nets and social security, like the United Kingdom, the way that we are paying higher taxes on products that are woven into the price on its own. So we don't go into stores and go to buy a candy bar, and then all of a sudden you go up to the teller and they're like, oh, that's another 50 cents on top of that. It's woven into the price and is included into what essentially makes that country run. And you get that back when you go to the doctors, and you don't have to worry about either going bankrupt or your life being taken. So it's all about give and take. But in the United States, as I said to this man in the car, I was like, the roads that we are driving on right now, That's socialism, right? That you're paying into a system that will give you, essentially, should be giving you what you need to survive. But the difference is, in this country, there are so many industries that are controlled by big money, by the top 1%, like big pharma industry. That means that form of socialism, they have to wage their war on it so that they can continue to keep their pockets lined. Because if you become aware of how that system could potentially work in a single payer, how it could work to benefit all people in the United States, then all of a sudden you're going to start to kind of throw away that term of socialism that they want you to believe, and you start to understand that it's all a manufactured term to keep big business in the position of power that they're in. So I think that, as I'm trying to get to the question that I think you were alluding to, Aida, is that it comes from an education of what it actually means. Now, you'll never hear anybody who talk about socialism mention any of the Scandinavian countries. You'll never hear them talk about Australia. You'll never hear them talk about the United Kingdom. You only hear them talk about Venezuela or Cuba, and then they'll try to blur the lines further and talk about communist areas and how they're so much more similar to what we, as people who understand what can become a benefit of socialist policies, are trying to push forward and say that, no, I'm not waiting in bread lines in the United Kingdom. I'm actually getting my healthcare. And the final note is a very personal kind of anecdotal for me. My father, 18 months ago, was diagnosed with bowel cancer. Now, he got it they had it caught so fast because when he hit a certain age in the United Kingdom, they send out a testing kit. That testing kit, which comes around, there is certain insurance companies that offer it, but I have a friend in the United States who works for a pharmaceutical company that actually manufactures the exact same kit. And that kit costs $600 if you don't have the right insurance coverage. So I was thinking to myself, if my dad was here and did not have the right coverage to be able to access that cancer might have been caught too late, as it happens to so many people in the United States, and he wouldn't have got the care. He was able to get that care, and thank God he's into remission now. But those are the certain stories that you hear, and those are the things that you have to try to bring up, I think, to try to drive the message across about the benefits of more socialized policies in order to get through to people.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's true though. That you never hear them talk about it's always Venezuela, Cuba,
Yeah.
but you don't ever hear them talk about where it's working.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I have an anecdote in Spain where right after the big recession 2008, and they tried to point their finger at Southern European countries and said, this is your fault, when it was actually a whole global system that was very much rooted in financial institutions from New York to London. My cousin, even in a time of mass austerity, so I have cousins that are Spanish citizens, when she had her child, she got 2,500 euros for having a kid. Everybody did. And that's when they had to lower the amount that they would give somebody. So imagine, not only is like schooling covered, so free tuition. I mean, places like Denmark, there's really no rental market because not only is the university covered, they're given a stipend to such a degree that they could afford to buy a place. So not only if we had what we would call socialism in this country, we would have universal health care, we would have free tuition. There would be so many other things that would recreate the welfare net that the Republicans have tried so very hard through this discourse to tear away at, because they're very much, I mean, not just them, of course, the corporate elites in the Democratic Party are the same. They're very much aligned with these multinational corporations and the corporate elite class. But I do want to say that we have a version of socialism in this country, except it's socialism for the wealthy.
Yeah.
They're the ones that are subsidized. When I have a small business, when PPP went into effect, I kept on applying through my bank, and like me and 90% other women of color, our PPP claims were never processed. But whose ones were processed? Millionaires, billionaires got the money. Oh, Lord, sorry. Stuff is all over my laptop. Millionaires and billionaires got our tax-paying dollars. Those we paid them to save their businesses that never trickled down. We already have disproven this. So tied to that is what we have failed in is in framing. And unfortunately, we've adopted the framing of the disingenuous Republican Party and the hardliners in the Republican Party. So unfortunately, we've we've lived in their discursive universe. So when they say socialism is bad, we constantly, like, we have to disprove, instead of unapologetically say, I'm down with socialism because it means free healthcare, and not have to prove all these things about different places. But going back to your question too, that the way that it's tied to Cubans in Florida and the rest of how we talk about and think about the Latinx or the Latinidad community in the US, we also have to understand that for those folks that got turned off by the words socialism, like, again, we're talking about the Cuban population in Florida, overwhelmingly in Miami-Dade County, that voted for Trump. That's the same. That's the same scenario that happened in 2000. Many of us were not counting on that population for a variety of reasons. And then another thing tied to that is that what we failed to recognize is, with the same thing with the Arab Middle Eastern community and the Latinidad, is that we have a color spectrum. And there are some people in our community that are categorized as white, and so they want to be seen in proximity with whiteness. So those assaults on our communities, they don't see themselves as part of our communities. So they're fine with that. They think they're different. They think they're an exception. They think that they've transcended the racial paradigm. And so they're fine with the rhetoric that comes out of Trump because they think it's not targeted towards them. But I do want to say that we have to, it's so funny, as we were having this conversation, my dad just sent me an article that said Latino voices overwhelmingly supported Biden in the election. We have to also break down that it's not just about the different groups, like you were saying, the Puerto Ricans that really stood for Biden in Florida. But it's about how these exit polls came out and the national framing around it. So the exit polls, you know, the article that we were talking about and is sent all over most of the media to do this kind of framing. One, it was taken from 22 states. So we don't know which states they took it from. But two, 75% of the data they're pulling is from voters on election day. And we know that's why we saw the red mirage, that election day was mostly going to be Trump voters. So for our percentages to even feel, although they were over 50% for Latino community, for Arab community, for other communities, that clearly for the Black community, although we're disappointed that there might have been an uptick in Trump's numbers, there was an uptick because we were taking data from election day, not from mail-in ballots, where the Democrats were the overwhelming majority of that methodology of voting. So we have to we desperately have to reframe these narratives before it becomes logic.